It wasn't streamed. It wasn't televised. And most fans didn't even know it was happening. But day 4 of the F1 private tests in Barcelona may go down as the most revealing, most chaotic, and most manipulated session of the entire preseason. Because what happened that Thursday, off camera, off script, was never meant to be public. While official reports focused on lap counts and tire compounds, something very different was happening behind the garages, inside team meetings, at loading bays, and between whispered conversations over encrypted radios. The headlines told you Mercedes was fast, but they didn't show you what happened after Antonelli parked the car. The urgency, the scramble to cover the floor, the sensor arrays being pulled off with gloved hands, like someone had seen enough and wanted it hidden. You saw Ferrari run 87 laps. But what you didn't see, what wasn't filmed, was the closed-door meeting between Hamilton's race engineer and a visiting FIA delegate. No interview, no explanation, just a quiet review of telemetry, and one phrase overheard by a mechanic: rear migration is still outside tolerance. And while you were waiting for Red Bull to appear, they didn't. No car, no driver, no statement, just silence. 2 full days of absence, allegedly due to a minor crash and a missing shipment of spares. But if that's true, if it really was minor, then why did Helmut Marko fly back to Austria that same night? Why did the garage remain sealed with no mechanics present? Why did Adrian Newey spend more time watching Aston Martin than his own team? There's more here. There's always more. And what happened on day 4? What no one filmed, no one posted, and no one officially acknowledged, might be the clearest signal of who's already behind in 2026, and who's hiding something bigger. On the surface, day 4 looked like a cleanup operation. Most teams had already gathered their key data during the first 3 days. So this final session? It was meant to be about mileage, validation runs, low-risk testing. Mercedes were the first out. They ran early. They ran clean. Antonelli looked calm, controlled, efficient. His 1 minute and 17.081 seconds came without drama. No traffic. No wind correction. No purple sectors that felt forced. Just a clean lap, faster than anything anyone else had managed all week. But that wasn't the point. The point was what happened next. After he pulled in. After the garage doors closed. After the screens went black. Because almost immediately, engineers began dismantling sensor arrays, covering the floor, removing telemetry packs. Not unusual, but faster than expected. And when 2 FIA observers walked over, just as the car was being wheeled back, they weren't stopped. But they weren't invited either. Inside the paddock, that kind of body language matters. It tells you whether a team feels confident or protective. Ferrari, by contrast, didn't push for times. Hamilton's 87 laps weren't about speed. They were about comfort. The kind of repetitive, deliberately slow programs a driver runs when he's still searching for connection. Turn 10 exposed that. That silent spin, no radio chatter, no complaints, was a message. He wasn't fighting the car. He was still trying to feel it. But for those watching closely, the data Ferrari collected during that run wasn't entirely for setup. It was for correlation between what the simulator says and what the chassis really delivers under stress. And just after that spin, a race engineer disappeared into the FIA compound. 10 minutes. No press. No notes. Just enough time to answer a question no one else knew had been asked. No media outlet reported it. No team made a statement. And yet, everyone inside the paddock knew by midday. Something had shifted. It started with a message. Private. Short. Quiet. Circulated between 2 engineers from rival teams. Check McLaren's rear stability curve. It doesn't match throttle trace. The wording wasn't emotional. It wasn't an accusation. It was a technical red flag. And in Formula 1, those are louder than any press release. Because that phrase, doesn't match throttle trace, doesn't point to driver error. It points to systems, control logic, electronic behavior. Within the hour, another message followed. This time from a senior figure at a supplier. Ferrari using dampers differently on cold track. Values outside expected delta. Again, no drama. Just precision. And just enough detail to make rival teams dig into their own data. Not to find speed, but to find what they'd missed. By early afternoon, requests for clarification were being drafted. Not public ones, internal. Team to FIA. Technical group to technical delegate. What they were asking for wasn't a protest. It was context. Because telemetry had begun to show behavior that wasn't accounted for by known setups. Subtle shifts in weight transfer. Unexpected torque stabilization in long corners. Flat outputs on otherwise variable throttle application. All of it suggested the same thing. Teams were testing systems designed to operate with the driver, but not because of the driver. And that opens a very complicated conversation. Because if multiple teams have begun embedding predictive behaviors, if they've moved past reactive suspension and into anticipatory load balancing, then what happened on day 4 wasn't just a test. It was a signal. No team has broken a rule. At least, not one that's written down. And yet, day 4 exposed something the regulations haven't caught up to. The current FIA technical code is detailed, but it's not exhaustive. It defines ban systems, but it doesn't fully account for behavior that mimics them without triggering enforcement. Take, for example, the case of McLaren. Their rear-end stability wasn't achieved through active suspension. There were no actuators, no hydraulic systems outside standard limits. But the way the car corrected itself mid-corner, without driver input, looked like something the rulebook doesn't know how to categorize. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't passive. It was something else. Predictive, but not programmable in the traditional sense. Ferrari's behavior raised similar concerns. During Hamilton's long runs, the car adapted to surface changes in ways that suggested internal compensation. Not mechanical, but systemic. As if the suspension was learning across laps. Is that illegal? No. Is it expected? Also no. And that's where the gray zone lives. Because once a system starts behaving like an aid, even if it's not defined as one, the FIA has to decide. Do they ban the result? Or the method? The issue is, they don't yet know how. These systems don't break rules. They bypass them. Not with deception, but with anticipation. And if that's what teams are starting to develop, then every lap from day 4 is a challenge to the very structure of how F1 defines legality. Because the future isn't active systems. It's invisible ones. Inside the FIA, silence isn't peace. It's uncertainty. And day 4 introduced a level of uncertainty they weren't prepared for. Because none of the systems in question raised alarms. No marshals called it out. No sensors triggered compliance flags. Everything looked normal. That's what makes it worse. The FIA has built its structure around detection, around signals, flags, and measurable thresholds. But these systems? They didn't exceed thresholds. They changed how the thresholds were reached. It's a difference that isn't easy to explain on paper. But on track, the effect is undeniable. The car behaves in a way that suggests more control than the rules allow, but without leaving any evidence that something illegal is happening. And that's what's keeping FIA officials uncomfortable. Because if they can't detect it, they can't ban it. And if they can't ban it, they can't prevent it from becoming the new normal. What's worse, these systems may not even be complete. What day 4 exposed might just be the early stages. Rough, unoptimized, data-gathering tests. What happens when they're refined? Built into the chassis? Used strategically across qualifying and race stints? The fear isn't that these systems exist. It's that they might already be invisible. That the data teams are analyzing now is only scratching the surface. And the real innovation lies in what they're not telling anyone. That's the part the FIA doesn't know how to regulate. Not because it's too advanced, but because it's too quiet. Because when Formula 1 begins to drift away from detectable performance, when success comes from how well you hide, not how fast you go, then the structure of enforcement breaks down. And that's the kind of shift that doesn't just change cars. It changes the sport. There's a reason no team filed a protest after day 4. Not one formal complaint. Not even a request for public clarification. Because they don't want the FIA to ban it. Not yet. They want to understand it. Copy it. Test their own version before anyone closes the door. That's always the first consequence of innovation in F1. Not punishment, but replication. Red Bull may have missed the final 2 days of testing. But sources suggest they left with a different priority. Not to improve what they had, but to reverse engineer what others were hiding. Ferrari, meanwhile, made no comment on their rear-end behavior. But telemetry leaks suggest they already knew what they were showing. They were gauging reactions. Not just from the FIA. From their rivals. And Mercedes? They ran early. Ran fast. Then shut it down. Because when you know you've shown too much, the next move isn't to go quicker. It's to disappear. This is where the consequences begin to diverge. For top teams, the gray area becomes opportunity. A chance to outdevelop, outsimulate, outhide. But for midfield teams, it's something else entirely. A trap. Because chasing invisible systems means burning budget. On tools they might never perfect. And in a cost cap era, those resources don't come back. So while the big names accelerate innovation, the rest fall further behind. Not because they're slower, but because they can't afford to guess. That's what the FIA has to decide now. Do they lock down the definition of these behaviors, even if it means banning something they can't fully see? Or do they wait and risk letting 2026 become a season where silence beats speed? Because the longer they hesitate, the more entrenched these systems become. And once they're standard, they're permanent. Right now, no team is under investigation. No one's been called to Paris. No one's been asked to explain their floor, or their software, or their behavior. But inside the FIA, the files are open. The data from day 4 is being reviewed, not for rule violations, but for patterns. Patterns that don't match known systems. Patterns that suggest influence, but leave no trace. Patterns that evolve. And that's where the tension really lives. Because if these are just early prototypes, the first steps in a larger concept, then what teams were testing in Barcelona isn't the innovation. It's the foundation. And that means the real version is still coming. Not in testing. Not in press photos. But in round 1. That's when the systems go silent. When software stabilizes. When passive becomes predictive. And predictive becomes strategic. If that happens, if the FIA waits until Bahrain to act, they're no longer regulating the car. They're regulating the championship. And the moment enforcement becomes political, every decision is questioned. Every protest looks like favoritism. Every directive looks like panic. Every clarification arrives too late. So this is the quiet moment, right now, when the sport is deciding what kind of season 2026 is going to be. Is it control? Or is it chaos, hidden in clean data? Because day 4 showed us something no one was supposed to see. And if that was just the shadow, then what comes next could rewrite everything.